So one of the questions that we get the most often is how OCPS prioritizes the schools and decides what order new schools will be built in. So to answer that question, I'm going to turn to Tom Moore, our demographer.
Okay. All right, school enrollment projections are the calculated future numbers for our district, and they are essential in making decisions about new schools. So I want to start off by talking about our projection model. We use cohort survival methodology, and this is what districts typically use for school enrollment projections. The state of Florida uses them for their population model. The DOE uses them for their school projections, and the Census Bureau also uses them for their population. What the model does is it formulates rates based on how historically students move up through the grade levels, and then applies these rates to existing enrollments to come up with a forecast. So when left alone, this methodology will reflect in-migration, out-migration, and even growth from new development, as long as there's a historical precedent, and that's the big condition. However, our district is unique, and we have a lot of residential growth. Countywide, we issue building permits for about 12,000 residential units a year. This requires that we track our development data. So in addition to the development data, we use birth data that we get from the Florida Department of Health. And our model also incorporates an attendance rate, the rate at which students choose to go to their attending school. And we also include transfers that occur into our school, into our model. Okay. Now this is a graph of our projections of traditional public schools. The thick black line is the actual enrollment, and the thick orange line represents our projection. Now, I put some other lines on there. These are the lines of the state forecasts over the past 7 years. And I put them on there to show you one of the challenges we have with the state. These are what they want us to use for planning our schools. And now, can you imagine back in 2011, if you look at the 2011 line, they actually had a declining forecast for us. Can you imagine if we used that forecast to project the past 8 years for us? We'd be about 18,000 student stations short of our goal. So, which is equivalent of about 6.5 high schools. So this is why we do our own projections. We use our own projections for planning. Now, like I said earlier, our district is unique because all of the residential construction, and it requires us to track the development. And this slide shows a piece of our layer used to track new homes planned or under construction. The colored areas represent developments. I have those areas labeled with the number of approved or proposed residential units. The colors show the status of the project, whether it's planned, entering the platting process, which means it's normally about a year away, or if it's underway. So before we can use any of our planning tools, we needed to invest in our data infrastructure. This is a layer it's a geo database and a product of a collaboration between the cities, the county, and the various departments of OCPS. The data we maintain is a GIS layer. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems, which is software that uses geographic elements linked to tabular data elements. The geographic features of our layer are the property boundaries of the projects, which are linked to data-rich table of the data below. We make updates to it weekly, and we currently have this layer shared online as a web map. Now, if you want to access this data, you can go to the demographics.ocps.net and click on the residential construction quick link. There, you can click on the bookmark links to zoom into particular areas. Okay, the data associated with each project includes the elementary, middle, and high school attendance zones assigned to the project, the number of residential units, and the number of students coming from the project based on our approved student generation rates. And it also has the status, whether the project is planned, platting, or underway, and if it's underway, what percentage of that project is completed. Okay. Next. Okay. So currently, we have about 600 projects in our development inventory that are either in construction planning or plating stages for about a total of 165,000 residential units. Stays about 600 projects every year. Some get completed, but a lot more get added. But it stays around 600 at a time. Now, although the developments are all throughout the county, they have an impact on all of our schools, and they cluster can be identified in these specific areas here. Okay. Now, in addition, we have ongoing data agreement with the Florida Department of Health where we receive birth locations annually. And using GIS, we can summarize the births by school attendance zone each year to determine if the area is naturally growing. Although much of our construction program is guided by new residential development, there are actually cases where we have enrollment growth from and overcrowding from natural growth as well. Okay. Now here's one way we use our development inventory. Every year during our advanced planning, we kick off our capital planning process with our elementary, middle, and high school build-out maps. The build-out analysis shows how many new schools we'll need for each attendance zone at the end of the life cycle of construction. This is the way we help formulate our vision first of where the district will be when all of our residential construction is completed. Okay. All right. We can use our development layer to assimilate when and where the students will be. This is a map zoomed in to that same area of the district I was showing earlier. The dots represent the existing students. We can make assumptions about where we'll be in 5 years using the status field, while using the GIS tools to show representation of future students with a dot. So these are the projected locations in 5 years. Now, assuming everything is built, we can show these dots as well. The projected dots are helpful in determining the sequence of these schools and when the students will be in relation to the schools when they're built. Okay. Next slide. This is another tool. We get other GIS data from our partner and friends at the Property Appraiser's Office. This is a Parcels Geo Database, which is very data rich. One field is the AYB column, which stands for actual year built. We can use this field by overlaying our school zones with this layer and create summaries as to how many residential properties are built each year for each school. This helps us determine if the growth is trending up or down and the relationship with the school enrollment. Okay, this is a sample of a tool we use to help us determine the timing of new schools using our enrollment projections. It shows the new schools and the potential relieving schools, the permanent program capacity, which is the number of students that can be taught in a non-portable portion of the school, and at the same time accommodate all the programs such as ESE. It uses our enrollment projection, which goes out 10 years. I could only show 5 years because of the size of the slide, but it does go out 10 years. And for each year, it provides the difference between the projected enrollment and the permanent program capacity. The tool helps us to determine the year at which the collective overage of the relieving schools will have enough enrollment to open the new school. So I want to make a few points now. Now, if you look at the new school, 85EW4, as you can see, 25 and 49 are schools that were slated to be relieved that we haven't even built yet. When Carol first started preparing the zones with the community, there may have been just a couple of hundred schools in those zones for the proposed zone for 49. And so our projections are assuming not only will 49 and 25 be filled by 2021, collectively they'll be overcrowded enough to support the opening of a new school. Okay, the other point I want to make is we cannot just use these numbers alone. We have to use the geographical analysis too. Just because one overcrowded school might show an overage of 350 students doesn't necessarily mean that we can relieve that school by that many students from that particular location. Okay? And the third point I want to make, and this is an important one, in an ideal world, we would just build out all the planned schools at one time and set all the zones at once. But as a result, we would have several schools with very low enrollments, which is not an efficient use of district resources. So instead, in growing areas, we have to allow overcrowding to occur in order to have enough students to open a new school. That is why we have portables in growing areas. That's why sometimes when we open a new school, that we almost immediately get portables. It's because we have a new school to relieve them up on the horizon. So our goal in the long term is to have each school to where they have 0 portables. Okay. And I want to illustrate another point about the school enrollment life cycle. Okay. I used Sunrise Elementary School because they went through a long stretch without any attendance zone changes. Sunrise was built in the late 90s, and it was one of those rapidly growing schools that we're seeing. Like we see now, Sunrise was a very rapidly growing school. The year prior to this graph, in 2000, 2001, they almost had 1,400 students. They got their final relief from Avalon and Camelot Elementaries in 2001, 2002. The residential development in what was their new attendance zone had built out. The enrollment peaked 1 year later in 2002, 2003 with 708 students. Now, over the course of the next few years, those students aged out and were replaced by fewer younger grade levels of students. Then in 2010, 2011, we got additional new students from the turnover of existing homes, but the enrollment number never did reach that 708 peak. In the following years, those students aged out, and then their enrollment decreased again. Eventually, in 2017-18, we did rezone some students from overcrowded schools back into this school. Now, all enrollment life cycles are not identical to Sunrise Elementary School. Some are less dramatic, some take longer time or shorter time to turn around. But one thing that most schools have in common is that their enrollments peak shortly after build-out and then experience a series of peaks and valleys. However, their enrollments rarely peak as high as they were when those neighborhoods were new.